December 1998. I was living with my girlfriend, Erin, who would be my wife in 5 years. We were both young copywriters. Erin's agency was having its winter holiday party that night. She had a few things to do at work and was heading to the party afterward. I was at our apartment. So a co-worker of Erin's, a woman I'll call Amanda, who lived in our neighborhood, offered to give me a ride to the party. I was dressed and ready, sitting on our couch, watching MTV. I remember specifically I was watching the music video for Radiohead's Paranoid Android when I heard the honk of a car horn outside my window. Out on the street was Amanda, behind the wheel of a 1967 Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. It was possibly the most rusted out piece of automotive shit I'd ever seen in real life. I got in. The first thing I noticed was a hole in the floorboard, right under my feet. As Amanda started to drive, I could see the street blurring by underneath. "Oh my God," I said. "How did you pass inspection with that?" She laughed the question away. Now, this particular night in December was remarkably cold. The bitter chill rushing up from the hole beneath me wasn't helping, so after rubbing my hands together for about a minute, I assumed the car was properly warmed up, and I asked Amanda, "Mind if I turn the heat on?" She shook her head. "No heat." No heat! I was minutes away from frostbite. Now, Amanda was kind enough to give me a ride, and I wasn't one to look a gift horse in the mouth, but I couldn't help myself. I blurted out, "How can you drive this piece of shit?" Amanda smiled and said something I would never forget. Quote, "You have to do what it takes to drive a Volkswagen," unquote. You have to do what it takes to drive a Volkswagen. Now, at that time, as a young copywriter and student of advertising, I believed that our goal, our task, was to convince people that the brands and products we represented were worthy of a target audience's consideration. Even better, worthy of their purchase. Wait, even better than that, worthy of their continued purchase, or what we call brand loyalty. But here I was, about to go to an advertising industry party in a car that wasn't worthy of any of that. Yet here was its owner, someone who clearly considered and purchased this car, not only pledging her loyalty, but explaining that her loyalty had no limits. Quite the contrary, she seemed to lean into the suffering required of her loyalty. Like the worse this car got, the more proof of her love for the brand. Her loyalty to Volkswagen, it seemed, was more valuable than the car itself. Miraculous. So, how does a brand do that? How does a brand create an aura around itself that is so enticing, so alluring, that its owners not only overlook its objective flaws, but actually absorb them as badges of honor, as proof of their devotion? When you think of it, the most powerful brands in the world are the ones we might not even think of as brands. They come in four basic types: family, religion, colleges, sports teams. These are more than brands. They're what we like to call uber brands. Because we hold them so close to our heart, they command our loyalty almost no matter what. Consider, few people are willing to break off ties with a family member or spouse, even if they've endured years of abuse. Same goes with their church, synagogue, or mosque. Same goes with their alma mater. Even if these entities have been embroiled in scandal, doesn't matter. And your hometown team, even if the on-field performance or on-court performance is terrible, fans will curse and moan. Then they'll cross their fingers that things will turn around next season. Trust me, I'm a lifelong Sixers fan. The superpower of the Uber brand is in its ability to generate limitless rationalization and forgiveness in its audience. This is not the case for regular brands, for for-profit brands. A few bad experiences at Starbucks, and you'll turn to Dunkin' or Saxby's or whatever, no matter how many years or how many dollars you spend at Starbucks. Because there is no such thing really as brand loyalty. There is only recurring purchases earned through consistent delivery of a great customer experience. And once that customer experience wanes or something better comes along, you'll become blockbuster. What's the point? Simply this. A for-profit brand rarely achieves the level of an Uber brand because that level of loyalty isn't transactional. It's not about the quality of the product or the perceived value of the product or even what the badge says about you. It's much more powerful than that. It's about belonging to something that's woven so deeply into your life that it's hard to understand yourself without it. Let me repeat that. It's about belonging to something that's woven so deeply into your life that it's hard to understand yourself without it. Very few for-profit brands can ever hope to reach that level. On this pod, we've already covered two of the most important American brands of the last 50 years, Miller Lite and Nike. As successful and profitable as both those were, neither reached this level, the rarest of rare air. But Volkswagen did, and how they did it, and the Uber-level loyalty that resulted, is the stuff of advertising legend. Hello, one and all. My name is Greg Ippolito. Welcome to the third episode of our limited series, The Greatest Ad Campaigns of All Time, where we are featuring, in no particular order, the greatest ad campaigns of all time. And today we are talking about what many consider to be the GOAT, the greatest of all the greats, Volkswagen's Think Small. A lot has been said about the Volkswagen Think Small campaign, and a lot more will be said on this pod, obviously. And most of the praise is around the creative. But there was a magnificent strategy that underpinned the campaign that centered on positioning. All too often, product or brand positioning is treated kind of like a box you have to check at the start of a new initiative. But in reality, it's much more important than that. In fact, I will make the argument right here, right now, that any brand initiative or campaign build or marketing strategy that doesn't take product positioning into serious consideration is a form of marketing malpractice. And the Volkswagen Think Small campaign is a premier and historical case study in leveraging positioning to fuel fantastic creative. Consider the positioning of the Volkswagen Beetle in the American automotive marketplace in the late 1950s. First, the best-selling cars of the time were mostly American: the Corvette, the Buick Skylark, the Cadillac Coupe de Ville, the Ford Thunderbird. Second, these tended to be big, powerful, gaudy, gas-guzzling machines. And the car ads of the late 1950s were equally gaudy: loud colors, flashy iconography, beautiful drivers, and tons of product information. Basically ads that were steeped in fantasy, but backed up by tons of practical reasons to buy.
No matter where you're going, getting there is a real treat when you drive Chevrolet, the best-looking, best-driving car on the road. Try a handsome new, gleaming new 9-passenger boat.
And now here comes the Volkswagen Beetle. Small, only 25 horsepower, weird-looking, reductive. The New York Times called it the German antithesis to tailfin America. So if you're looking to position a product against your competition, if you're looking to go to market with something entirely different, this car was it. It was weird versus beautiful, simple versus complicated, small versus big, economical versus expensive. The problem, of course, was that in being the opposite of what everyone was buying, therefore it was quite possibly the opposite of what everyone wanted. That would have scared off most marketers from doing anything but bending over backwards to meet the norm, to regress to the mean. Now, as if the Beetle didn't have enough working against it in that regard, it had another inherent problem, a big one. To paraphrase the late great Norm Macdonald, I don't know if there are any history buffs out there, but in 1933, there was an election in Germany, and a guy named Adolf Hitler was voted as the country's new chancellor. Germany was in bad shape, so Hitler started signing all kinds of executive orders and ramping up new programs to make Germany great again. One major initiative was the formation of Kraft Deutsche Freude. Apologies to any German speakers out there if I butchered that. I'm sure I did. Anyway, Kraft Deutsche Freude means strength through joy. Shortened to KDF, this organization aimed to show citizens the benefits of Nazi rule. Adolf Hitler pitched KDF an idea for an efficient, affordable family car, the Volkswagen as he called it, or people's car. Ferdinand Porsche, yes, the same guy who would later launch the Porsche Automotive Company, was tasked with designing it. And in short time, he delivered a prototype that looked a lot like the car we know today as the Beetle. The original name, however, was the KDF wagon. All right, a whole lot of stuff happened after that we don't need to get into. Skip ahead. So now after the war, we have some problems. Germany is decimated. The KDF wagon factory is damaged, as is a lot of Europe. The British military government restored the factory to produce vehicles for the post-war occupation and reconstruction. And though progress was slow, by 1946 the plant was producing 1,000 cars a month, so suddenly a phoenix had risen from the ashes. Heinrich Nordhoff, the head of the organization, officially renamed the brand Volkswagen. By 1948, VW was producing 20,000 cars annually. Once used mainly by British forces, Beetles were now being purchased by civilians in Germany and abroad, including the Netherlands. But beyond that, Volkswagen, the company, struggled. Post-war Europe still had a large number of roads that were badly damaged, which suppressed demand for new cars. Plus, there was the obvious brand problem. This had been Hitler's pet project, after all. British car manufacturers had no interest in selling them. And while some GIs had brought Beetles home from the war, U.S. car dealerships didn't want to touch them. The New York Times literally called the car Baby Hitler and ridiculed its small, strange-looking design. But in 1953, Nordhoff saw an opportunity in America. His car was cheap, fuel-efficient, and easy to repair, unlike other foreign cars at the time. In 1954, he launched Volkswagen of America, building a vast dealership and service network stocked with parts and trained mechanics. The idea was that no matter what happened to your car, it could get serviced or repaired quickly and cheaply, which positioned it strongly against other foreign automobiles. And by decade's end, there were 807 VW dealerships in the U.S. Sales rose from about 6,000 cars in 1954 to 150,000 by 1959, but still trailed far behind U.S. giants like GM and Ford, who each sold over 2 million cars annually. VW needed a new strategy to truly break through in America. So now let's jump back in time. In 1949, an advertising copywriter and creative director named Bill Birnbach was thinking about branching off on his own. He and his colleague Ned Doyle, who worked together at Gray Advertising, were at odds with their agency's approach. Gray's methodology was becoming increasingly scientific, driven by the pursuit of creating repeatable formulas that would increase the agency's profitability. This is 1949, and it very much echoes what's happening in 2025. So Birnbach and Doyle teamed up with a friend of theirs, Mac Dane. He was running a small agency that had a nice little roster of clients, and they launched Doyle Dane Birnbach, or DDB. Now, anyone who works in advertising knows DDB. These guys are legends. If you're not in advertising, but you like the show Mad Men, DDB was likely the inspiration for the agency Sterling Cooper and Partners, and Birnbach a likely inspiration for Don Draper. Anyway, 1949, Bill Birnbach writes a manifesto for his new company. In it, he ushers in what he promises will be a creative revolution. Birnbach wrote, quote, "Let us prove to the world that good taste, good art, good writing can be good selling," end quote. Volkswagen went to DDB in 1959. The agency was small, but had already earned a reputation for thinking outside the box. Again, Volkswagen was getting some traction in the US, but the sales numbers were dwarfed by the powerhouse car brands from Detroit. If the VW brand had any shot of becoming truly viable, they needed something extraordinary. Now, just a quick note here to set context. This is 1959, just 14 years after the end of the war. And here comes Heinrich Nordhoff asking the guys at DDB to sell Hitler's car to Americans. Imagine if a car manufacturer from Afghanistan walked into your agency and asked you to help him sell a vehicle that was the brainchild of Osama bin Laden. Impossible, right? And 9/11 happened 24 years ago, not 14. Add to that how small and weird the car was compared to the big, beautiful cars of the day. Add to that Birnbach and Dane were Jewish. Again, I'm just setting context here, but yeesh, that is some context. Bottom line, there were tons of reasons for DDB to say no thanks and turn that business opportunity away. But Birnbach and company weren't afraid of the challenge. Forget a challenge. They were on a mission to launch a creative revolution. And the Volkswagen campaign would represent the first major clash between traditional advertising and the renaissance that was to follow. When I say that Volkswagen went to DDB in 1959, I'm talking about a man named Carl Hahn, whom Nordhoff had made president of Volkswagen of America. Hahn was sent to New York to find an ad agency that could spark the difference they were looking for. Most of the agencies on Madison Avenue had disappointed Hahn. They showed him spec work that looked like most of the car ads he'd already seen, an illustration of the Beetle on a lovely suburban driveway with a red-cheeked family standing around it admiringly. Bill Birnbach at DDB didn't do any of that. In fact, they presented no mock-ups or sketches, no concepts. Birnbach's explanation was that he didn't know the product very well, nor the audience. Instead, he showed Hahn DDB's portfolio of past work. He explained the market challenge for each one and how the DDB team used empathy and creativity to change minds. Hahn was struck by this. He was also struck by Birnbach's candor. The Beetle needed something different, and Birnbach was different. Volkswagen and DDB signed a contract for $600,000 inclusive of media, which was a fraction of what car campaigns cost even in those days. And Carl Hahn invited the DDB team to visit the factory in Germany. Birnbach was impressed by what he saw, especially with the pride the workers took in their craft. He said aloud, "This is an honest car," and that was a note that would resonate. The next step was to determine the product's positioning, again, the importance of positioning, something the other Madison Avenue agencies had missed. Why would they show mock-ups of families admiring a car in their driveway? This car was weird and small. It only had 2 doors. It didn't scream family-friendly. But it was affordable, cheap to run, and fun. This, Birnbach thought, was a car for young people, and that's who the DDB team would set out to connect with. Birnbach assigned the team of Helmut Krohn, the designer, and Julian Koenig, the copywriter, to develop ad concepts. Now, advertising creatives at the time tended to work in isolation. The copywriter would typically write the words first, and then the designer would put them into layout with whatever visual elements he saw fit. This was the tradition on Madison Avenue. It was the tradition at Gray Advertising, which Birnbach fought against. In his view, copy and design should work together, bounce ideas off each other, explore in the same time and space how art and copy could work together to be something greater than the sum of their parts. It was a Gestalt approach which was, ironically, very German. More to come after this short break.
Consumers are more self-directed than ever when it comes to how they get and share information. They don't want to be talked at anymore. Your future customers aren't numbers to be hunted. They're human beings who want to be engaged. They're out there, each day, traveling through digital and physical worlds, searching for answers, looking to be inspired, and eager to share captivating, authentic content with the important people in their lives. Are they finding your brand? If so, are you giving them what they truly want and need? Can you imagine a near future where people, in droves, are coming to you for answers? Where they're so inspired by what you're doing that they light up social media channels? Where they know you, trust you, and think of you first at the exclusion of all others? At IMA Digital, we can. Visit ima314.com.
So, Helmut Krone, the designer. He had a reputation for being achingly meticulous, for tinkering with designs to such minuscule degrees no one around him can tell what he was changing. Said Krone in a 1968 interview, quote, "I resent the charge that I'm a perfectionist. I feel that there is this imaginary line, and you have to get over that line. As soon as I feel I'm over that line, I quit. I don't go any further." End quote. Krone's style was minimalist, and a lot of hours spent getting over that line seemed to be taking out visual elements that distracted the eye. He claims that he got put on the account only because he was the only one who owned a Volkswagen and that no one else at DDB had ever heard of the brand. Krone also claims that if it were up to him, the campaign would have failed.
Well, I felt that the car was so utterly preposterous that we had to Americanize it as quickly as possible, and maybe get somebody like Dinah Shore to do a singing commercial like she was doing at the time. See the USA in your Chevrolet, and I thought we needed something really fast, quickly like that.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America is asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all.
Now, Julian Koenig, the copywriter. He was from a family of lawyers and judges. He studied at Dartmouth College, then spent 4 years in the U.S. Army fighting the war. He briefly attended Columbia Law School before dropping out to write a novel that went nowhere. He dabbled in a lot of things. He was a freelance writer. He was a horse bettor. He co-owned a semi-pro baseball team that went bankrupt. But advertising kept pulling him back. In 1959, he was probably best known for the headline he wrote for Timex watches, "They take a licking and keep on ticking." Birnbach recruited him to DDB. He appreciated Koenig's conversational, self-deprecating style. It ran contrary to most ad copy of the time, which was rife with hyperbole and bluster. Koenig once said, quote, "Advertising is built on puffery, on, at heart, deception, and I don't think anybody can go proudly into the next world with a career built on deception, no matter how well they do it," unquote. His copy for what would become arguably the most important ad in history assumed an unusually warm and candid tone. He talked about the car in real-world terms, instead of just a list of features. He made the reader visualize not the car, but life with the car. Bob Garfield wrote in Advertising Age, quote, "To be amused by Koenig's copy was to be flattered by it," unquote. It's the kind of writing that seems so simple and accessible that anybody thinks they can write it until they sit down and try. As mentioned a few minutes back, by 1959, VW was building a name in America, but a small one. If Detroit was creating Cokes and Pepsis of the automotive world, Volkswagen was kind of like a Fanta. How do you get people to choose that weird little brand at the end of the aisle on the third shelf down over Coke or Pepsi? Well, by making it sound like the smart choice that the average person overlooks. Here is Koenig's body copy from the Think Small ad. Our little car isn't so much of a novelty anymore. A couple of dozen college kids don't try to squeeze inside it. The guy at the gas station doesn't ask where the gas goes. Nobody even stares at our shape. In fact, some people who drive our little flivver don't even think that 32 miles to the gallon is going any great guns, or using 5 pints of oil instead of 5 quarts, or never needing antifreeze, or racking up 40,000 miles on a set of tires. That's because once you get used to some of our economies, you don't even think about them anymore. Except when you squeeze into a small parking spot, or renew your small insurance, or pay a small repair bill, or trade in your old VW for a new one. Think it over. This was, as Birnbach intended, a car for the young. It was a car that presented itself, as Bob Garfield wrote, as the antidote to conspicuous consumption, the badge product for those who fancied themselves a cut above. So Birnbach had Koenig and Krohn lean into everything about the Beetle that was unique. All of the things that were negatives to the typical American car buyer, that is, the male head of household, would be positioned as benefits to their car buyer, the young adult with a mind of their own. Krohn and Koenig both agreed that the Beetle's goofy shape was something to show off in the ad, again turning something possibly negative into a positive. Krohn decided to do something really different. Most car ads filled the upper two-thirds of the space with a beautiful, full-color hero shot of the vehicle. Krohn, by contrast, used an image of the Beetle shot at a 45-degree angle and placed it in the upper left corner of the frame. And he stripped all the color out. Krohn also used Futura sans serif typeface for the heading and body text, which was unheard of at the time. And he cut the copy up literally with a razor blade to leave widows hanging. He wanted the copy to look as authentic as it sounded. What was left was an oddly shot image, supporting copy that spoke about the economies of owning a car like this, that laid the singularity of this vehicle bare in literal black and white. No tricks, no bluster, no puffery, no deception. Just a great, fun, sensible vehicle for those who had the kinds of eyes who could see it. All these little touches added up to a layout that arrested the eye. It sent a message that was at once familiar and very different. It drew you in, and then it made you smile as you read through it. Well, it made some smile. It made others furious. I mentioned Mad Men earlier in the pod. There was actually a scene in one of the episodes where Draper and the creative team have a heated debate about the Volkswagen ad that directly followed Think Small. This ad featured a close-up of the Beetle with the single word headline beneath it, Lemon. The body copy explains that this particular Beetle had a blemish on the chrome strip of the glove compartment. Quote, chances are you wouldn't have noticed it, the copy reads, but one of the VW inspectors did, and they won't sell the car unless it's perfect. Very clever, very smart, but Draper and the crew were underwhelmed.
I'm just saying we can be funny, like those Volkswagen people. You see this yet?
I have. I don't know what I hate about it the most, the ad or the car.
You know, they did one last year, same kind of smirk. Remember Think Small? It was a half-page ad and a full-page buy. You could barely see the product.
I don't get it. Elvis just got back from West Germany. Why not put him in it?
They must be getting results. They keep going back to the well.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Honesty. It's a great angle.
No chrome, no horsepower, foreign, ugly. Guess I went with their strengths.
It is funny.
It is? Because I think the joke's on us. You're supposed to look at that and say it's a great car, not a great ad.
I laughed. I think it's brilliant.
Brilliant. I'll tell you what brilliance in advertising is, 99 cents. Somebody thought of that, Campbell.
Well, say what you want, love it or hate it. The fact remains, we've been talking about this for the last 15 minutes.
One thing I love about this scene is how Sal starts the debate by picking up the magazine, showing it to the room, and saying, "You see this yet?" The question itself implies the importance of the object in question. When a work of art is meaningful, whether that's an ad, a movie, a song, a book, etc., it becomes news. We use cliches like viral and buzzworthy, but all of these terms mean the very same thing. A sure signifier of art's greatness is when it gets people talking. It's worth noting that the only guy in the room at Sterling Cooper who liked the ad was Pete Campbell. And that's important because Pete is the only guy in the room under 30. All the other guys, Don, Roger, Sal, Paul, all old by comparison. Remember, Birnbach deliberately set out to connect with young people. Not all car buyers, young car buyers. Now, as with any great campaign, luck usually plays a part. And in 1959, the culture just so happened to be at the beginning of a metamorphosis we would only understand later. One afternoon in 1968, Time magazine editor Richard Klerman was chatting with Leonard Bernstein, the legendary composer and conductor of the New York Philharmonic. They were talking about the political and cultural changes that had taken place in the previous decade, when Bernstein surprised him with this note. Elvis Presley, he said, is the greatest cultural force in the 20th century. Corman was taken aback. What about Picasso, he suggested, or Einstein, or MLK? No, it's Elvis, Bernstein insisted. He introduced the beat to everything and changed everything. Music, language, clothes. It's a whole new social revolution. John Lennon echoed these sentiments as well. Before Elvis, he said, there was nothing. Bob Dylan said of Elvis, quote, hearing him for the first time was like busting out of jail, unquote. This will all lead back to Volkswagen, trust me. Just give me a little leeway. Okay, so, if you ever find yourself bored one day, try this little experiment. Look at the Billboard Top 100 singles for every year following the Second World War. Right up to the year 1955, you'll see a lot of the same names. Perry Como, Frank Sinatra, Danny Kaye, Nat King Cole, Rosemary Clooney, Glenn Miller and his orchestra, and the aforementioned Dinah Shore. Basically, what we would come to call adult contemporary music. For about a 10-year period starting with the end of the war, the radio played music for middle-aged adults. That is until 1955. If you look at the top 10 singles for that year, you'll see a lot of the same names I mentioned, but along with one glaring new addition. Bill Haley and his Comets with the song Rock Around the Clock. All of a sudden, with that one track, rock and roll had broken through. Now, check out the top 10 singles for the next year, 1956. Again, you'll see a lot of the usual suspects, Doris Day, Dean Martin, Pat Boone, but you'll see another glaring new addition, Elvis Presley. And not just one little song either. Elvis had 5 songs in the top 15, including the #1 song of the year, Heartbreak Hotel. All of a sudden, the radio didn't definitively belong to the adults anymore. Now at the time, the Ed Sullivan Show, which aired on Sunday nights, was the most watched program on television. It drew an average of 40 million viewers per episode, which was roughly 30% of the entire adult population. Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, contacted Sullivan to book his star on the show. Elvis had already charted 10 times, including 4 #1 songs. He'd appeared on The Milton Berle Show. He'd just signed a movie contract with Paramount Pictures. Now is the time to feature America's fastest rising star on America's #1 show. Except Ed Sullivan refused. Milton Berle had received backlash from parents who were offended by the young star. In a time when Perry Como was the standard, Elvis proved a stark contrast. Songs that had a bump and grind staccato, a dark, handsome young man who crooned in a low, soulful voice, and teenage girls in the audience who screamed and cried and fainted. Oh, and then there's the gyrating hips. 1956 may have been ready for Elvis's music, but it was not ready for Elvis's sexuality. So, Steve Allen booked him instead. Steve Allen was a comedian and talk show host whose Sunday night program aired directly opposite of Ed Sullivan's and therefore received far lower ratings. Elvis performed his hit song Hound Dog to Allen's audience, and that night, the Steve Allen Show crushed Ed Sullivan in the ratings, which had never happened before. Not beat it by a little bit, crushed. So much so that the very next day, Monday morning, Ed Sullivan called Colonel Parker and invited Elvis Presley to appear on his show. Here's why this matters. Up until July 1st, 1956, the night Elvis appeared on the Steve Allen Show, the adults called the shots when it came to culture. Again, just a year before, and for years before that, the radio was for them. TV was for them. Movies were for them. Teenagers and young adults were ignored. They had no say. But all of a sudden, because of Elvis, they did. Ed Sullivan didn't invite Elvis to come on his show because he wanted to. He did it because he had to. Because the Monday morning after the Steve Allen appearance, Ed Sullivan's advertisers called him up, one after another, fuming, and asking why Steve Allen's advertisers got in front of 50 million viewers who tuned in to watch the hottest star alive, while their audience was stuck watching Perry Como for the 17th time. The youth of America suddenly had a voice. They had power, and Elvis was the conduit for that. Everything that changed from that point forward, the counterculture movement of the 1960s, civil rights demonstrations, Vietnam War protests, the ERA movement, all of it can be traced back to the big bang that was Elvis forcing Ed Sullivan's hand. The power that young people now had also made them a valuable demographic. Just like they chose Elvis over Perry Como, they would choose different movies than their parents did, wear different clothes than their parents wore, and drive different cars than their parents drove. And this is where the luck part comes in. Because with this new approach to advertising that cut completely against the grain, Birnbach and Company took a big risk, yes, but they reached the right audience at exactly the right time in exactly the way they wanted to be reached. They caught the very early crest of a wave that would grow to tidal size over the next decade plus, and by extension, Volkswagen would become the unofficial car of the youth movement of the 1960s. The car that was once a pet project of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had been redefined as a statement brand for young Americans who wanted to reimagine their country and their place in it. It became a symbol of those rejecting consumerism and the excesses of post-war American life. VW Beetles and later microbuses were often modified by kids with psychedelic paint jobs. They were used as campers. They featured into the surf scene on the burgeoning West Coast, soundtracked by seminal California bands like the Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, and the Doors. VW started appearing in movies. They became associated with the early environmental movement, since they were cleaner and more fuel efficient than American gas guzzlers. In fact, Julian Koenig later became a figurehead in the environmental movement and even coined the term Earth Day. And by the end of the decade, at the legendary Woodstock Music Festival in 1969, a whopping 45% of vehicles driven by attendees were Volkswagens. Talk about flower power. Now, affecting culture is one thing, but the car business is a business. So let's get down to brass tacks. How well did VW actually sell? By 1970, the end of the counterculture era, VW sold 570,000 cars in the US, almost 4 times what it had sold before the DDB campaign, which also represented 7% of the entire US vehicle market. Today, VW sells around 400,000 vehicles each year in the US alone. Worldwide, it's close to 5 million. It's hard to fully appreciate how important the Think Small campaign was. If you look at it now for the first time, it seems like a clever, quirky, if dated little ad. But at the time it was released, it was absolute watershed. It shattered every conventional norm of advertising. It introduced honesty and self-awareness. And in a larger sense, it may have preceded postmodernism as an artistic movement. It pioneered minimalist design and layout. The copy employed wit and intelligence in a way that no ad had ever done before. And it showed that a persuasive message could be constructed with attitude rather than just a list of features and benefits. And it set the template for a slew of legendary VW ads that followed: Lemon, Wilt Chamberlain, the Joneses, the blank page ad, the moon landing ad, the snowplow spot, and on and on and on. In 1999, Ad Age magazine compiled its definitive list of the 100 greatest ad campaigns of the century. Volkswagen was number 1 with a bullet. Advertising Hall of Fame member Jerry Delafemina wrote, quote, "In the beginning there was Volkswagen. That was the day when the new advertising agency was born," unquote. Back when I played that scene from Mad Men where the Sterling Cooper crew debated the Volkswagen ad, I dovetailed out of this segment by saying that a sure signifier of art's greatness is when it gets people talking. But I'd like to suggest a different definition of greatness, one that sets an even higher bar. And this definition comes from Mr. Dave Chappelle, who himself earns the label. He said that the definition of greatness is when everything before you is rendered obsolete and everything after you bears your mark. The Volkswagen Think Small ad is perhaps the last campaign that truly meets that definition. I'll challenge you to isolate any ad message that you may come across today. Literally any one. Might be a display ad, a social media post, a print ad in a magazine, a pre-roll video. Might be B2B or B2C. Doesn't matter, take your pick. Then examine it. See what it's trying to do. Analyze the interplay of art and copy. Sense the tone. See what makes it work. Then take another look at the Think Small ad. Regardless of what you pick to analyze, you will see the DNA of Think Small in it. 65 years later, DDB's Volkswagen campaign remains the pivot point where everything changed. It was as important to advertising as the Beatles were to pop music, or as Einstein was to physics. And despite all the technological and data-driven advances that have exponentially advanced advertising in the decades that followed, we will never see an evolutionary leap in creative messaging that comes close to matching what Bill Birnbach and his team accomplished.